Good evening, Modiin. Happy Tu B'Av. I know there's just a few couples here on a romantic night out, right? You know, as we think about planting the seeds for the future. We're going to talk about Shmitta in Modiin as opposed to Shmitta in the Beit Midrash or Shmitta in other cities. Modiin is a slightly different city for a number of reasons which I will get to soon. But I have to talk about Tu B'Av because it is Tu B'Av. It is the 15th of Av. There's a very odd pasuk where it talks about the prohibition of cutting down fruit trees in Israel. And it says, Ki ha'adam etz hasadeh. Because human beings are literally, they are the trees of the field. That's a very odd allegory. Because if they said they are the trees of the land or trees of houses, that may have made more sense. But trees of the field. And there is a concept here that it's telling you that just as you respect as humans have a much higher value on their lives than other animals, apparently trees have a much higher value on their lives than other forms of vegetation. But this relates to Tu B'Av because what Tu B'Av is all about, people call it the Day of Love. You know, it's lovely that we live in Israel and that there are all of these things that since Tisha B'Av have gone on sale that apparently you're meant to buy for your spouse or your whoever intended is to show them you love them. And it's nice they're doing it on a supposed Jewish day. What Tu B'Av actually was it was a time when men and women would get engaged randomly. And specifically they did it in vineyards and orchards. And this is the point I was trying to make about it, Ki Adam Etz Sadeh, because there's a concept here of that it's very important to very carefully and properly pick your spouse, that should be the right person, and that you'll be happy with each other, and you will happily bring up children together, and you'll take the time to do it. But sometimes it's better to apparently just pick the first fruit off the tree. And 2 days a year, the other day is actually Yom Kippur, right, we're apparently serious enough 6 days after the fast of Tisha B'Av and on the day of Yom Kippur to do this. And this is this connection between Ki Adam Etz Hasadeh, man is the fruit tree of the fields. Something special there, and we recognize this in the way that apparently we pick our spouses. Tu B'Av actually does have implications in Shmitta. It's actually more to do with Tu B'Shvat. The main implication of Tu B'Av, any of you having trees, it's important to know this. If you want to get around Orla in the minimum time of 2.5 years, get those trees in your little gardens tomorrow. It's the last day. So then you'll be able to eat the fruit that comes after the Tu B'Shvat 2.5 years later. That is the day. There's a similar date for Shmitta that relates to heavy trees, but it's more complicated because in theory, if it was a fresh tree, you wouldn't be able to eat it anyway because it would be orla, right? It's relating to trees that are not orla because they've been somewhat in the ground but not in the ground. I won't go into that now. This shiur is not about trees and gardening. I'm happy to give another shiur on that if people ask. There have been a lot of shiurim about that in Modiin and other cities. Not about what I'm discussing here today. So I want to talk today about Shmitta. So Shmitta, in theory, the prohibition of Shmitta is actually comparable with the prohibition of Shabbat, in that it actually tells you things that are forbidden to do, specifically 4 malachot, which are 2, as like the beginning of Gemara Shabbat. Zriya, which literally means planting. Zmira, which is a form of malacha on Shabbat. It's actually a tool of planting for vineyards, that if you carefully prune the vineyards in the right way, by pulling off the leaves, it actually encourages them to grow. And people who tend vineyards do this all the time, and therefore that is forbidden. The Torah explicitly states it's forbidden to do that on Shmitta. The Torah also states it's forbidden to perform tzira, which is harvesting, and then adds to that a betzira, which is the technical term for harvesting grapes. Now, what's the difference between harvesting and harvesting grapes? There are differences. I have to add something here right now. If harvesting is forbidden, like it is on Shabbat, then how can you pick Shmitta produce off a tree? And there's an interesting difference because this doesn't count on Shabbat. On Shabbat, you're over on the love of harvesting when you go and you take an item and you break it off the tree. That's it. You've harvested. On Shmitta, you're over the negative prohibition of harvesting when you take a big basket, and you walk in a way that says, nobody touch them, I'm doing this properly in one go. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's what harvesting is. On the other hand, if you walk past a fruit tree on the side of the road here, and it has a piece of fruit in it, and you say, I wouldn't mind a lemon in the salad today, and you pick it off, that is not harvesting in terms of Shmitta. And we'll come to why that is important. There are what the Rambam calls the rabbinical prohibitions of Shmitta, which is harisha, ploughing, rasisa, weeding, and hashaka, which is watering. These are important because they're all forms of... Now, harisha is interesting because it's not related to these other malachot at all. Harisha is not related to these other malachot in the slightest. But harisha is ploughing, that's preparing the ground. It's pretty obvious what the problem is. Once again, it's a prohibition on Shabbat. Weeding is important because weeding is somewhat related to both harisha and zriya. That is important for making plants grow nicely, and watering is related to planting. These are things that's forbidden to do on Shmitta. Now, this is not the subject of the Shiur, other than to state that apparently the core prohibition of Shmitta is working the land. And why that is important is because we're talking here about Shmitta in the supermarket and in the kitchen and in a restaurant or a cafe, and there's no land being worked. Now, I know a few of us in Modiin have nice, cute little gardens, many of them smaller than others. Some people have larger ones, and it's really nice, as opposed to our friends and cousins in Bnei Brak and Yerushalayim who have pot plants only. Okay, it's very nice and lovely, but that's not the main focus here. You have therefore this amazing contradiction that comes, that most people are concerned about Shmitta in the shops, and Shmitta when they're sort of trading things with their friends, and it's not clear there are any genuine prohibitions on virtually all activities that are not directly agricultural. Now, the only prohibition is there, it's hinted at in the Torah, and it's explicitly stated by the rabbis, is in what is called trading in Shmitta. That is where you are making genuine money off Shmitta. Now, it's not 100% clear what that is. I will come to that where it's related to various other solutions people have for Shmitta. And what that means, and I'm slightly over-exaggerating here, but according to a number of authorities, the major issues on Shmitta are not necessarily with the food that you do or do not buy, that you do or do not eat. It's with what happened before then. And that means that while there is a certain extent to which you shouldn't encourage people to perform certain activities, but once the food is out there, it's not necessarily clear that it's forbidden. People compare Shmitta to other agricultural prohibitions, and there you get to difficulty. So you have Truma, right, which has very strict things that if Truma can't be eaten, okay? So Truma is very strict. Then you have Teva, which is produce that hasn't had Truma Maaseh taken out. They have all of their statuses, all the prohibitions. They're in a very different status to Shmitta. And that doesn't mean there aren't certain things in Shmitta you should not be eating. But that is what there is in Shmitta. And therefore, I'm now going to quickly list 7 different forms of food that will be available in various shops and otherwise over the next year. And then we're going to try and relate to how they actually relate to us. In no particular order. Otzar Beit Din. Otzar Beit Din literally means that there is fruit or something that grows naturally. Now, because in theory I can go and take the fruit for myself, that's not commercial. But the problem is that we don't all live near wherever the fruit is growing. And so what the Beit Din does is based on a hint of what, it doesn't say it explicitly, but it's implied in the Gemara Yerushalmi in Shvi'it, is that the Beit Din appoints a group of people to say, everyone here wants some apples. We can't all go there. If we do, we'll make a mess. So we're going to appoint one person, okay? One person. You're going to go and you're going to take 6 apples for everybody, okay? And we're going to pay you for your time. We're going to pay you for your transport. We're going to pay you for your expenses and inconveniences, okay, to go and get it. And what that means is that any money that gets transferred is not for the produce itself. It's for all of the work in getting the produce and for convening the Beit Din. What's the Beit Din required for is to actually be able to stand up and say, well, I didn't ask this lady here if she wants any apples. I didn't ask this gentleman here if he wants any apples. We are going to assign the fact that we know that there are 20, 30, or if not 200 or 300 or 2,000 or 3,000 families who want apples. The apples are there. They can't be sold in normal fashion. We're going to ask someone, we're going to appoint someone to go out and collect the apples. That produce is called Otsar Beit Din. Okay. A different kind of produce. Hetzer Mechira. Now, I was at a talk 2 weeks ago where a certain individual was considered an expert on the history of Hetzer Mechira. Talked about, he was asked to give a Shmitta seminar, talk at a Shmitta seminar for Beit Rivka teachers, Beit Yaakov teachers. Sorry, okay, wrong city. Okay, for Beit Yaakov teachers, and he happened to be speaking at a women's session, and people talked about all these different things. And he went in, he was asked to explain to them what the deal was with Hetzer Mechira. And he said they couldn't listen to him because he kept on mentioning the word Hetzer Mechira. And in the political environment they had lived in, it was like mentioning, I don't know, pork on a cheeseburger. I don't know. And he wasn't trying to tell them they should be eating Hetzer Mechira. He was trying to explain them certain halachot about it so they would be able to answer their students. Okay. People get very emotional about the words. Why? That's a good question. I'll give you a quick background to this as such. So in the first, if I can call it organized Shmitta, after the first Aliyah in the 1870s and 1880s, it was the first time the Jews were actually genuinely farming the land in groups. The JNF owned huge tracts of land, which they'd given and appropriated to various different groups to use. And now they'd finally started producing decent food, and now Shmitta year comes up and it's like, what are we going to do? And a solution was sought. And the solution that we came up with was that if the land becomes owned by non-Jews for more than 1 year, I'm going to actually how much more than 1 year is, and then not only that, the real malachot that are forbidden are performed by non-Jews, right? Planting, harvesting, ploughing, watering, all of these kind of things, then we will consider, or could we consider, that the produce is in fact not produced in violation of the Shmitta. I'm being careful to say that it hasn't been produced in violation of the Shmitta. Whether it has holiness or not, I'll get to. It's now considered not forbidden produce, or not a wrong way to produce the produce. Now, there were many conditions on how and why it could be made, and many people who attack Hetzer Mechira today based on the fact that after you compare the Jewish community in Israel today with the Jewish community in Israel in the 1870s and 1880s, that is a very correct comparison, but they're leaving out other things that I will get to as we try and resolve these things. That is what Hetzer Mechira produce is. Okay. Yevul Shishi, produce of the 6th year. Now, as people you may hear when you read scaremongering newspaper articles and blogs that apparently some of your fresh vegetables aren't as fresh as they're meant to be, and the supermarkets have a way of keeping vegetables in deep freeze or almost frozen for months before they serve them to you, and that way when they have lots in 1 week and not so many 5 weeks later, it all balances out. This sounds pretty creepy during the 6 years, but during Shmitta year it actually sounds quite cool, right? That actually using these methodologies, tomatoes and specific other things that always get mentioned in such ways, apparently find their way into the Shmitta year, well into the Shmitta year, much more than you could imagine, using ordinary, regular supermarket procedures. Okay. Yevul Nochri, non-Jewish produce. This is taking into account the ruling of the Beit Yosef that land owned by non-Jews is not considered Shmitta land. That means that when the non-Jew works the land and produces things from the land, the food is just ordinary food. Now this is taking into account the fact that we are not in a time of complete Geulah, and while it may be wrong to sell the land of Israel to non-Jews, they own it already. So they own it already. So they're working the land, they're selling stuff, good. Buy it from them. Yevul chutz la'aretz, produce of outside. Yes?
Sorry,
please.
What's the difference between the category you just described and the Hetzer Mechira?
I'm going to get to that when we get to the controversy of it. Okay. I mean, the biggest, simplest thing being is the Heter Mechira is designed as an overarching solution for sociological problems in Israel. Buying from non-Jews at a simplest level is simply a commercial decision. That may or may not be preferable halachically, but it's simply a commercial decision. And according to the people who believe in it, they need to not have too much influence on the non-Jews, because the non-Jews have to be doing their business because they're doing their business, rather than acting sort of for Jews, because then it's more like Heter Mechira, which, if you don't like that. So produce of out of the land of Israel. This sounds like another very simplistic solution for many things. There are issues with produce from outside of the land of Israel. In Talmudic times, it was actually forbidden to import produce into the land of Israel during Shmitta because it encouraged cheating. As we will get to understanding the various forms of cheating with Shmitta. Okay, and specifically there's a leniency stated that there was a famine in the times of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he permitted importing vegetables from Chutz La'aretz in that particular Shmitta. And until then, no one ever bought in vegetables from Chutz La'aretz. Okay. Neta menutak literally means a planting that is disconnected. So it's pot plants, but more specifically, in order to keep with the whole variety of different opinions and try and make it according to everybody, it's pot plants that are completely disconnected from the ground. There's a number of definitions of that. And they are completely undercover. Okay? Undercover.
In a hot house.
They're not necessarily in a hothouse. They're undercover. A hothouse requires walls. Right? It actually is undercover. Now, this is also interesting. It could be covered by a sheet, but we deal with this on Sukkot, the halachic definitions of a cover, right? Which can be quite lenient if you find your ways around them. And it's Sukkot and in many different halachot, right? For this, they are much stricter without getting to that, but it doesn't need to be a greenhouse. But having said that, a greenhouse is a very good start. But they require more than just a pot. They require something underneath the pot. There's a number of definitions again of what that means. Having said that, if you're on a covered balcony, that's straightforward because you're not on the ground anyway, and you've got another balcony above you. So people who have covered balconies, that's great. All of the balconies in my particular accommodation are uncovered, which we think is great at Sukkot time, but at Shmitta time, we don't actually have a permanently covered place to put any pots that's outside of the house. If you do it properly, they can get a lot of sunlight, and they can actually grow very well. Kedushat Olei Bavel is the last one I'm going to call it. It's an interesting category because I'm going to start from here, work backwards. What apparently happened was that when the Jews came from the land of Egypt, they came to inherit the whole land of Israel, as described in a number of different parashiot we read recently. But when the Jews came from Babylon, they came in smaller numbers and they only took what they took. And didn't necessarily conquer it, they simply colonized it, if I can put it that way. The land was open for them, they colonized empty tracts of land. And the land they didn't colonize lacked a certain sanctity. Now there's an argument in the Talmud, according to some people, that actually deliberately didn't colonize certain land for the purpose of Shmitta, which I won't get into fully now. What that means is there are parts which actually could be in the land of Israel halachically, from people who argue about the map of Israel, but since they were not colonized by the Jews who came then, the Gemara states in Chulin explicitly that they are not considered holy for purposes of many different halachot until Zman HaMashiach. Yes. Yeah. Now, interestingly, Jews lived in some of these areas in the late Second Temple period. But it was the colonization that was done in the early Second Temple period that counts. A specific example it gives is Beit Shan. Beit Shan, there was definitely Jews in the garment industry in Beit Shan in the late Second Temple and post-Second Temple period. The Romans had a big garment industry there. The Jews lived there then, and they farmed Shmitta food for people for the rest of the year. We're going to go into that now. Okay, these categories are important because not only will people use these terms when you turn up at someone's house or Brit Milah or function to say that's what the salad or the fruit is, there will be products on the shelf that will have these words all over them. Okay, and sometimes written correctly and sometimes written incorrectly, because some of them are putting them there because they heard it's approximately correct and it makes them sound more kosher, and some of them are just doing what they're told. Okay, now when it comes to Heter Mechira, in general, they're simply following instructions. The other ones, they varied. I'm going to try and explain how they vary, but I'm going to bring two controversial opinions that are prevalent in the Haredi world that completely disagree with each other, and then work out where most of Israel sits in between. So what is known as the opinion of the Badat Yerushalayim is that the land of Israel before Mashiach does not have the same sanctity. And therefore any land owned by non-Jews has no sanctity. And so therefore non-Jews produce fruit and vegetables, and there is no Shmitta issue with them at all, and you just buy these and you're well and good, and you have no issues at all with Shmitta. The opposing opinion, well, the stuff that they have in Israel is Yevul Nochri, yes. Okay, the non-Jewish produce. The opposing opinion, it's known as the opinion of the Chazon Ish, is based on a posek called the Mabit, who lived not long before the Beit Yosef in Tzfat as well. I don't know if they actually ever met. Who holds that the land of Israel was holy. It's happened already. It's holy. Everything is holy, right? It's forbidden for Jews to do certain acts in the land of Israel. But if a non-Jew is permitted to do whatever he wants, but his produce is still Shemitah produce. So where these opinions come is they result in two different philosophies. The philosophy of the Chazon Ish is that all of the produce of the land of Israel is holy, and so therefore, for a variety of reasons, it may be better to use produce that came from Jewish fields, and therefore things that grow on trees and just, produce less when not tended to properly in the Shemitah year, their produce is preferable. It is preferable to buying non-Jewish produce. There's nothing wrong with buying non-Jewish produce, but it's preferable. It's a special holiness, but there's many, many rules we'll get into for eating that produce. Sometimes it's also called the Bnei Barak Shita. Once again, these are generalizations. Okay, in Rehovot they're very picky about the Shita as well. It's not just Bnei Barak. Okay, the opinion of the Eida Haredi Yerushalayim is that there's no sanctity in the produce of non-Jews. Produce of Jews is compromised because there's many rules as to how you're meant to eat it. How do we know how the Jew really produced it? And therefore, their approach is it's better to go the non-Jewish solution. And so we have two opposing opinions that, they respect each other and they can see where each other is correct, how they could eat each other's produce. The person who believes that all produce of the Arabs is holy will still eat their produce, if that's what they've got. And they'll treat it like it's holy, like it came from a Jewish field. They just may not worry if the Arab is a sinner or not, because the Arab doesn't have to keep halakha. Okay, and similarly, the person who holds that the produce of non-Jews is not holy, if they end up being served food that was correctly produced by Jews, will treat it carefully with sanctity. Nonetheless, the political opinions drive them in different directions. Specifically on two things, foreign produce and heter mechira. So both of these Haredi opinions have great difficulty with heter mechira for completely different reasons. But I'm not going to deal with the whole heter mechira thing now, other than to say completely different reasons. The biggest issue with heter mechira for the Eida Haredi opinion is that the land of Israel is only holy if it's owned by Jews. And therefore the worst thing you can do is even temporarily sell Jewish land to a non-Jew. Before you get all the issues of supposedly cheating and whatever else happens with heter mechira, you're selling Jewish land to non-Jews. For the people who hold like the Chazon Ish, even if it's a wrong thing to do, it's not changing the status of the land, because all of the land is holy. So you're not moving the land out of its status of holiness. So based on that opinion, depending on what the products are, people who follow the rulings of the Chazon Ish would see produce, right, of heter mechira, if that's what they had, and would potentially eat it and treat it with a certain sanctity, because in the end it was produced how it was produced, right? It wasn't cheated, it wasn't produced in one of the completely forbidden ways, and they'll eat it the way they are. But someone who holds the Eida Haredi policy will not eat it at all, because there are so many things that are wrong for them with the way it was produced. Okay. Now, in theory, they should both agree on Yevul Chutz La'aretz, foreign produce, but the Chazon Ish's approach is more respectful for the fact of the importance of the land of Israel, and so they are less keen on importing Because importing encourages cheating. Because they believe in using Israeli produce that comes from Jews that comes in the right way, right? They want to discourage all forms of cheating, and bringing too much produce in from outside of the land of Israel confuses people about seasons, confuses people about what is or isn't available, and it allows cheating. So therefore, they are less inclined to that, but the Edach HaRedit policy that doesn't focus on the land of Israel so much encourages that more. Now initially they used to do less of it, now they do more of it. And we'll come now to what the big issue is here. So you go to the standard supermarkets in Israel. Now, for many different reasons, what you call a standard supermarket in Israel from a non-standard supermarket is distinguished by one clear thing, is that the standard supermarkets in Israel are all, for want of a better term, under the supervision of the chief rabbinate of Israel. That doesn't mean that they have super Mahadran products. It means that everything in there, at some level, has been approved by them. Now, why this is so important, and living in Modiin is a wonderful example of this, is because we're in Modiin and all of the supermarkets are kosher. And why is that important? For two different reasons. Firstly, there's a lot of religious people who live in Modiin and it makes it easy for them to find product. But secondly, Modiin is an extremely Jewish city. And while it's good to let Jews who really want to go out of their way and buy non-kosher food buy it, and there are places to buy it, all of the standard stores sell food that is acceptable only, whatever acceptable means. And so we've produced something that everyone can have. So there was a supermarket chain that used to exist in Israel called Aleph. Anyone remember Aleph? So Aleph went bankrupt last Shmitta. Now, Aleph had huge ads on highways saying, "V'Shabbat ha'aretz Shabbat laHashem, tishmor Shmitta k'halacha, tikneh be-supermarket shalanu." And one of my rabbis at Yeshiva criticized this because he said, Shmitta is in the fields. It's all very nice that you're careful about what comes out of the fields, but Shmitta is in the fields. It doesn't exist in supermarkets, right? There are things that may be wrong to buy in the supermarket, but you don't make Shmitta happen in a supermarket. And what this supermarket did was try and set up a supply chain between non-Jewish sources and foreign sources that would allow them to bring in all the fruits and vegetables people want continually for about 20 different branches across the land of Israel, some of which were in Haredi areas, some of which were not. And the whole tightrope was too much. I'm not aware they ended up paying too much for the fruit and vegetables, but the exercise of moving them back and forwards broke their general supply chain. Because instead of bringing food in the normal way that supermarkets do, they were chasing too many shadows. And they simply weren't able to bring things in, and they weren't able to bring things in, and then people weren't able to buy things. People weren't able to buy things, you run out of cash, your business goes under. The supermarket chain disappeared in a 3-week period. It just disappeared. The stores were simply liquidated and sold off in a 3-week period. And the lesson from this is that while the idea in theory of trying to be extra strict in Shmitta, and not just for a little corner, they were advertising in all parts of Israel, it may not be practical and the outcome may be even worse. So you have to be a bit careful with trying to be as such too strict. And I want to point out that the Chazon Ish, in a lot of his tshuvas to do with Shmitta, has a lot of leniencies on dealing with less religious Jews. Because the Chazon Ish points out a number of sources that state that if we keep Shmitta to the level that both our less religious neighbours hate us and we encourage them to completely break Shmitta, then we're not keeping Shmitta. Now, it doesn't mean the Chazon Ish is strict on a lot of things in Shmitta, but that is prevalent in many of his writings on Shmitta. And that goes against the grain of the Jerusalem approach, which is the people who know what they want to do know what they want to do. Once again, the supermarket chain tried to bring the Jerusalem approach to everybody. It just couldn't work, supply chain-wise. And here's the biggest problem. And now we learn what the Chazon Ish's issue is with importing. If you import fruit into Israel, you're replacing fruit and vegetables that are grown in Israel. And if you're importing stuff we have already, what happens to the stuff they grew last year when it grows this year? They're sending it out of the land of Israel. And sending Shmitta produce out of the land of Israel is another problem. If Shmitta produce is permitted to be eaten, it shouldn't be sent overseas. Now, it's actually not forbidden when it's sent overseas. unless it's specifically from a certain category. I'll introduce this now. There's a category called svichim. Things that would not normally grow by themselves, even though they could grow by themselves, are considered forbidden on Shmitta, even if they do grow by themselves. You're allowed to let your animals eat them, but you don't eat them. The best example of this is grain and beans, legumes. It's so funny, actually. We moved into a new place on Shmitta last Shmitta time, and they laid down the soil but didn't have time to actually put down the gardens. So they had this really fertile soil that was untouched, and Shmitta came, and it started growing wheat. We've got no idea where it came from. We were not near any fields. It started growing wheat. But in some sort we can pick it. So no, wheat was forbidden in Shmitta time. So if you find produce from Shmitta, for Israel produce overseas in the 7th year, provided it's not something that doesn't grow naturally, it should be actually permitted to buy. Some people would say you even should buy it. And more specifically, if you've bought it, it's definitely forbidden to return it. Because once it's in your hands, it's in your hands. I won't go into this now, other than to say that especially in Europe, I lived in Europe for a number of years, a lot of Israeli produce reaches Europe these days. And in Shemitah year, a ridiculous amount of Israeli produce reaches Europe. And certain groups spread horror stories about how terrible it is to eat Israeli produce during the Shemitah. Now, most of their background is not halachic, it's political, not to do with whether it's permitted or not, it's to do with their feelings of the state of Israel. The problem is they encourage people, without realizing it, who've bought Shemitah produce to return it. Now, if it's problematic to buy it, it's definitely forbidden to return it. It's the same thing, actually, if during the normal years you buy Israeli produce and you're overseas and you realize it may not have Truma and Masrot taken out of it, it is forbidden to return the produce. You have to take the Truma and Masrot out yourself. I don't want to deal with that too much more. So what we deal with now is we're in the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, Baruch Hashem, we have more than 7 million Jewish people in the land of Israel. And they are very, very hungry. And these days, we don't just eat pickled cabbage and borscht. We actually like to eat fresh vegetables. And it's all very well that I can make a cute store around the corner here that will serve all of us real from people, right? But the fact remains is this is a city of 95,000 Jews, right? You know, and some of them would rather eat non-kosher. Most of them are happy to eat kosher provided they have no effort required. And many of them really want to eat kosher. We have to take care of all of them. And this therefore relates to how we deal with Shemitah policies. The Heter Mechira, from my perspective, and then now I'm going personal, the Heter Mechira is a necessary evil. Maybe it's wrong to call it an evil. It's a necessary problem. Because while the issues of hunger that were prevalent 130, 140 years ago are not prevalent anymore. We could live on tinned vegetables if necessary and other things, and importing things that don't grow in Israel, so there's no cheating. We instead have to do with the fact that we're a society and people expect things to be a certain way, and we have to find a way for it to work. I was privileged to be at a Shiur given by the chief rabbi of Israel, who, as we all know, has a big connection to Modiin, and he talked about how these people, completely secular farmers, 6 months before Shemitah year, call up the office of the Rabbanut Rashid of Israel to arrange their Shemitah things. Right, now, you can argue about, how much impact are they really having with Heter Mechira, but they're suddenly actually trying to keep Shemitah. You're saying it's a not very great way of keeping Shemitah, you might want to say. They're doing it. And then the produce comes out, right? And the produce is now available for all the people who want to buy kosher, who want to buy produce, and their supermarket keeps kosher. They're living in cities, right, where the shops are kosher, right? The falafel stores are kosher. You can't have falafel without cucumbers and tomatoes. So, 4 Shmittas ago, I went to school in Beit Began. Well, Beit Began is in Jerusalem. It was not a Eidah Haredit stronghold, and they tried not to argue nor with the Eidah Haredit nor with the Chazon Ish, and the falafel stores in Beit Began only had pickles and olives and some kind of preserved cabbage. That's all they had, right? And every now and then someone would walk in the store and say, "What is this?" Now, once again, I was visiting Israel for a year. I said it to my family. We said, "Okay, that's what you do in Israel." But then we went to Kiryat Yovel, the other side of the suburb, and the falafel stores all had tomatoes and cucumbers. Truth is, we went to Meir Sharim most days of the week. It also had tomatoes and cucumbers, but they didn't invite Began. So us super from people could say, "You know what, we'll do without." But certain people will not do without. And falafel stores cannot run without tomatoes and cucumbers unless they're in a very religiously oriented area who's willing to accept that explanation when they turn up. We need to provide food for everyone here. And from this perspective, and what I add in my particular idea that's echoed in many parts of halakha, that the main problems, if they exist with things like heter mechira, is the actual actions themselves, which do not exist for us when we go to stores, is why not only does it need to exist, it has to exist, and without which the whole state of Israel doesn't run the way it needs to be. Now, the heter mechira has, the big issues the heter mechira are, firstly, we're letting the Jewish land of Israel get in the hands of non-Jews. The second thing is that we're not trying in any way to let the land rest. People from, with education in agronomics and other such things will tell you that all land should rest. Crop rotation is a standard thing. We have it dictated to us. There are many reasons like this why the heter mechira is just, a short-term cheat. Maybe it's just too much. Maybe it's not necessary. So therefore, I'm going to quickly list problems with the various other solutions. Non-Jewish produce. So there are many people who write against non-Jewish produce. Many of them are politically oriented. They have issues with the non-Jews who we're buying the produce from. At the moment, I think some of us would have difficulty buying from some of the farmers in certain parts of Israel who are not Jewish, right? We would consider it problematic that we're out there trying to overpay them for their vegetables and trying to nicely imagine they'll use it just to rebuild their houses or educate their kids with something useful like engineering or farming. Okay? The second issue with that is cheating. Basically, if we buy cucumbers, actually, more than half the cucumbers in Israel do come from non-Jewish farmers. This is an interesting thing. But if we now ask them to provide us with more cucumbers or to provide us tomatoes as well as cucumbers, we're encouraging them to cheat, because where are they getting those tomatoes or cucumbers from? Now, it's possible they're just changing their site, but the answer, they can go. Now, if we're lucky, they're just going to a heter mechira market and buying them, right? But if we're unlucky and they're cheating, they're actually going to Jewish settlements that are not keeping Shmitta at all, dumping their fruit and vegetables, buying it from them and selling them to Jews. Okay? Big issue, therefore, with non-Jewish produce. It is very difficult to make up. There were times when they used to leave mashgichim in these various parts of Yehuda and Shomron and Aza throughout the Shmitta year. The mashgichim don't quite have the fortitude to hang around and spend the year camping out there anymore for various reasons. It's problematic. That doesn't mean that any of this produce is wrong and is not kosher, but it's problematic. Foreign produce is a similar issue. Foreign produce encourages cheating because the local produce is based on seasons. And as soon as you have foreign produce coming in, you can cheat around the seasons. And Shmitta is more seasonal because certain modern farming practices make fruits and vegetables less seasonal than they would be. Importing them from out of Israel allows people to then cheat with local produce that hasn't been taken care of correctly by saying that it is imported. Yeah. Tunnels for what purpose? But you're talking about for growing. You're talking about growing food that's not in the ground.
Yes, I don't know.
Okay.
It's in Jordan, but it doesn't make a difference. It's not Israel.
Well, I'm going to get to this now when I get to the solutions. Okay.
But there's other Jews too.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah? Because it mixes up the seasons. Okay. And it's cheaper. Well, it's an interesting thing here. Most countries now have laws that require you to label foreign produce because people want to know what's local. And
people might take their regular produce and say it's foreign.
yes. Because it's illegal to call foreign produce local. It's not illegal to call local produce foreign. This is a supply thing. Everyone wants to know what local produce is around the world now, right? It's not illegal to call it foreign at the same level because you're.
Isn't it checking for us in supermarkets or stores?
I'll get on to what checking means. Okay. Now, so in terms of the other various things we mentioned, sixth year produce only lasts so long. Things grown in pot plants and hydroponics, there's only certain things you can grow. and the yield is less. And the parts of Israel that are not Israel, how much of them are there? Sorry, please, yes.
You're talking about fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
What does any of this apply? How does it apply to secondary products? Say, for example, pasta sauce, which is made from tomatoes. Presumably, the tomatoes have to come from somewhere. Bread, wheat before, with crackers, and all of the pre-made products that you buy in the supermarket.
Well,
Any other issues with those?
this is what I'm going to get into, and if you pay attention to the labeling, you'll see it. And the seasoning will come to you. The seasons will come to you. So now I actually want to explain where all your food is actually going to come from next year. Okay. So certain products have been identified as 6th year capable. And for the first 2 to 6 months, certain produce will come from 6th year based on standard supermarket practices. So you probably won't find them in the organic store or otherwise, but the supermarkets will carry various produce on that level. And you have tin produce. It just lasts, right? You have frozen produce, lasts a lot longer. Things will come in that particular way. It's very standard. That's where some of the produce will come from. Pot plant produce, people who used to buy Mahadran lettuces and seasonings, they will come, virtually all of those products appear Mahadran grown in pot plants all year round. It's not quite the same product, but it's almost the same product. I won't go into exactly what the differences are. So therefore your lettuces and coriander, parsley, dill, basil, those things that are bought in those things will be available at an apparently more Mahadran level. And the way you'll know it's a Mahadran level of any product, from tinned sources to anything, is they will have some supposedly more recognizable hechsher. I will state that as a rule of thumb, no Israeli products have a Mahadran hechsher. Even Mahadran can simply mean a local Rabbanut Mahadran if there is Heter Mechira in it. Now in theory, therefore, all the Rabbanut should be accepting Heter Mechira, but now we're getting onto another problem that I will get to. When I say accepting it, I meant for minimal supervision, not for Mahadran. There are certain products that will come from overseas. They will be labelled overseas produce. There are products that come from non-Jews. They will be labelled non-Jewish produce. And that's where these words will specifically come in. They will be available at general supermarkets. Now, Otzar Beitin is a problem because it's problematic to sell Otzar Beitin produce in a supermarket. I'm not saying it's not done, because it's meant to be personal. The Shmitta food is there for eating. So, for example, if there's a fruit that's normally eaten fresh, you don't make it into jam for eating later. It needs to be eaten now. Now, you might not get to eat it now, but it needs to be eaten now. And that also means that you don't say, every now and then we turn up to Rami Levi, one of the other supermarkets, where cucumbers or some fruits on special, and some bubba turns up and fills up 2 shopping trolleys with them, right, and walks out to make pickles or to make jam. Okay? It's complete, I won't leave the supermarket policies. It's completely permitted during the year. On Shmitta year, if it's holy produce, that is forbidden to be done. Perhaps if really everyone asked you, you could do that and buy for all your friends, but you can't do it for yourself. And so Otzar Beitin produce needs to be sold in a special way. So Rav Lau apparently championed the cause of Otzar Haaretz in Modiin 7 years ago, and he said the way it worked was a bit of a disappointment for him, as in that things didn't work out as well. But Rav Lau had stated that he has high hopes that Otzar Beitin will work wonderfully in Modiin with much better support and planning this time than it worked 7 years ago. Now, I lived in Efrat 7 years ago. There was an Otzar Haaretz store. We used to buy tomatoes every alternate week. Now, it didn't bother us because we got over it at Shmitta, so we didn't have tomatoes. Right, but the local hamburger store in Efrat was a chain of burgers bar. It had a Mahadran Hechsher, as I guess people in Efrat expected. But you can't have burgers bar without tomatoes and cucumbers. Lettuce isn't a problem. You can't have it without tomatoes and cucumbers. And they couldn't guarantee them supply of lettuce and cucumbers. And the Rabbanut of Yerushalayim made a controversial decision to not allow Heter Mechira in standard supervised stores. They allowed it in supermarkets, but not in food stores, restaurants, takeaway. And then they ran into a problem that their food stores were short of supply and they had difficulty supplying them. So Burgers Bar in Efrat is based on a Jerusalem chain and tried to bring the cucumbers and tomatoes from Jerusalem, but the Rabbanut B'Yerushalayim wouldn't let them because they said that they were very special tomatoes and cucumbers, and they only arranged them for people under their supervision. Right? It got to this terrible politics. Actually, in the end, the Burgers Bar in Efrat, towards the end of Shmitta year, had a special hechsher that was ordained by the rabbis of Efrat that was mahadrim with Hetz Mechira vegetables. Because Hetz Mechira wasn't the only hidur people were looking for. Some people were looking at the hidur of the meat. I think certain people specifically, they wanted to know the meat was glad kosher meat. In general, mahadrim means not that. And so when you see all your produce around, it will be labelled with these things in general. Now, you mentioned sauces are a great example. Tomatoes don't appear Hetz Mechira for about 5 or 6 months, but you will find by Pesach time that a decent majority of canned tomatoes, canned corn, certain other things will all say Hetz Mechira on them. Now, once again, is that a problem for you or not? There are philosophies on that. It's going to be a problem if you're going to visit your cousin in a certain suburb who's offended by that. Or someone's going to come and visit you, right? Or you may decide to try and, champion the cause that Rabbi Lau is promising us will be more effective this year with Otzar Haaretz having stores around Modiin, right? But, people come around for Shabbos lunch and they always offer to bring salad, right? They always offer to bring salad. So, we're going to tell everyone to bring ice cream now. I don't know. So whatever, once again. And your kids will go to birthday parties. We live in Modiin because we want a somewhat open religious community, and there may be even people who want to be supposedly more mahadrim, but what's available? My understanding from people I've spoken to is that the Rabbanut in Modiin tried to be extra strict with the food establishments in Modiin 7 years ago, with having them only buy Otzar Haaretz products, and it was moderately successful. There are 3 times as many kosher restaurants and cafes under supervision now than there were 7 years ago. I'm not sure if they can supply that. This is a game that's currently being played out in Rabbanuts around Israel. In Jerusalem, in the end, last Shmitta, there were all of these food establishments with certificates from Matei Yehuda, which is a different Rabbanut adjacent to Jerusalem, because Matei Yehuda allowed them to serve Hetz Mechira vegetables. And people said, what, you don't want to pay for Rabbanut Yerushalayim? They said, no, we can't find vegetables. We need to be kosher. We can't find vegetables. So here I'm giving you all a bit of, I'm annoying you all a little to say, it's good to be frum, it's good to be strict, but it isn't always possible. Now, from a certain perspective, this is my perspective, from a certain perspective, it is right and proper to say that it's Shmitta year, and this week we have no tomatoes. We've only got, insert name of other fruit and vegetables here. But in a certain way, you're sort of talking down to other Jews by saying, just suck it up and have Israeli salad with capsicums instead of tomatoes. It's difficult to say that. It's difficult to say that. And from this perspective, I think it's very, very important that we see why we need to have a variety of things. And there is scope in Modiin to be stricter, and there is scope in Modiin to be more lenient. Yeah. Well, this is where it gets funny. I was in Netanya last Shmitta, and I walked from North Netanya, where all those Anglos live, to Kiryat Sons to buy some vegetables. And the guy was eyeballing me. He wasn't sure he was going to sell them to me, because he didn't know if I knew what I was doing. So it's a good question. The ones who want to do supermarkets, best to go like the Eidach Haredit policy of, if they get it, the various non-Jewish produce and the imported produce, and then you can do whatever you want with it. No issues. Now, Kiryat Sefer is an interesting example because it really is half Bnei Brak, half Jerusalem. And an amount of the politics that exists there is for that reason. Isn't there plenty of Haredi cities that are more Jerusalem or more Bnei Brak, but Kiryat Sefer literally is halfway. It is on the road from one city to the other, as opposed to Beit Shemesh, which is much more Jerusalem than Bnei Brak. And it depends on the stores you go to. My understanding is the supermarket closest to here, the one in Modiin Elite, It's Zol B'Shefa. The standard vegetables there will be supposedly non-Jewish or foreign vegetables, right? But there will be these little stores selling fruit and vegetables around. But apparently there will be in Modiin as well. Now this is apparently a little plea that came out from Rav Lau and others, is that Otzah Haaretz, when it starts up, asks people to pay a membership fee, which you get back. In theory, you pay a certain amount, then every month you take a voucher worth that amount and you simply get fruit and vegetables. And the reason they're doing that isn't like some kind of loyalty club to sort of have you charged in advance. But by getting enough people involved in advance, it validates the shlichut ideal. Because they actually are your shlichim now, because you're paying them to go out and collect the food. That's lovely. Then the issue then comes is that if you do visit an Otzar Beit Din store in a smaller Haredi town, they may not wish to share with you, because they may, even if they know that you know the halachot of Kedushat Shviyit, they may not really feel that you're part of their collective. As opposed to if you looked like someone from Bnei Brak who's part of a different collective. It's sort of evening out the fact that one day they're going to buy from a store in Bnei Brak. Once again, some people are very polite about this. Some are not. Some of them are just very cautious. You just have to be patient if you buy in such a store. Someone had a question? So,
Do you know which stores will be stocking in Modiin?
in Modiin, the standard supermarkets will all be Heter Mechira.
And also Beit
Or there will be supposedly some Otzar Beit Din stores. I wasn't here last time. I don't know if there'll be one of the, in theory it should be one of the standard fruit stores. Sorry, you have information?
There was one down the block here in Kaiser.
Yeah.
That was the only one.
The only one in Modiin. But there were a lot less religious Jews in Modiin 7 years ago than there are now. And there are hopes, the Rabbanut, the Rabbanut definitely intends that all of the Mahadran stores in Modiin, which includes all the pizza stores, now they don't actually need anything with much Kedusha for their pizzas other than capsicums and perhaps onions, because everything else they can get out of a can. But they all sell salads, because Modiin's a very boring modern city, right? They all sell salads, and the salads require it. The Rabbanut has high hopes that these stores will be able to supply them all. Now, I have to see what happens. Now, I have high hopes that it's there. When Rav Lau spoke to Modiin about this, he stated on two hands, one, that him and his Rabbanut did many, many things to strengthen Heter Mechira, to make it more real. An example he gave was that they worked very hard to ensure that land was being bought and sold by the genuine owners of the land, and not leaseholders and other such things. Okay, but on the other hand, really, really wanted to push that Otzar Beit Din was a great choice. Now there's one more little controversy with Otzar Beit Din, and that is that a number of people are confused as to whether it's really better or not. I have a bunch of relatives in Bnei Brak who will try and eat Otzar Beit Din produce only. And from their perspective, there's a special mitzvah in eating Kedushat Shviyit. Now, it's not clear that there really is a interestingly named commentary on the Ramban's commentary on the Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam called Megillat Esther says it is. No one else explicitly says it is, but many people tack on to the fact that there is nothing holy we get to eat in modern society. No one's eating Truma, no one's eating Kodshim, no one's eating Maaser Sheni, right? All we have is Kedushat Shviyit. And therefore they take a real thing that there's something very special about eating Kedushat Shviyit. And if you can find something that's proper Kedushat Shviyit, there's something very special on these fruits that have grown literally by the hands of God. Even though man did work last year and many years past, it's very special. That's apparently very, very special. Some people state that's a bit of an exaggeration. It's nice to eat it, you shouldn't let it go to waste. I won't spend time here talking about all of the kitchen practices that are necessary for Kedushat Shviyit, other than apparently it's special to treat Kedushat Shviyit fruit like it is holy. And people sort of do this when they take out Trumot and Masrot, but we don't actually do that with Trumot and Masrot because we don't treat it as food. It's actually all rubbish. But, we have this argument between Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Elyashiv about the leftover little bit of fruit on a stone pit, okay, whether it is holy or not. It's because it's literally, should you make the extra effort to literally suck the stone pits off? Right. A similar example. As everybody knows, mandarin peels are inedible, right? Orange peels are edible. Orange peels are edible. Therefore, orange peels have holiness, mandarin peels do not. And so Shmitta time, we're going to actually take extra effort to, I don't know, make those orange peel desserts. Anyone here make orange peel desserts? So, everyone makes orange peel desserts. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here a little. We live in a city of more than 90,000 Jews. These people want to eat. And I have to state, the majority of these people want to eat kosher food. It's quite something to see the number of non-kosher establishments that have gone kosher or closed down in Modiin over the last 4 or 5 years without any pressure or protests or any such things. It was just good for business. Okay? And it's very important that kosher food is available for everyone, because everyone's got some crazy relative who wants food that's at least kosher, if not mahadran. Everyone in this city does, and they eat with them. And that's what we have. And food has to be available in Shmitta. It doesn't have to be the same. Well, Israel is still a little seasonal, and some of us come from other parts of the world where fruit is even less seasonal than it is in Israel, and in Australia and the United States, you expect many fruits to be in the supermarkets 51 weeks a year, right? In Israel, some of them are like, 26, 25 weeks a year. We've got to accept this. This is what it is, right? But we can only do it to a certain amount. And it's very, very important that we encourage the Jews of Israel to know that it's Shmitta, to know that it's not a bad thing, and to know that they've got to adapt to it, but that they're going to get on with their lives. It's really, really important. And that's our responsibility, because as much as we're going to keep Shmitta for ourselves, and perhaps try and be a bit stricter, whatever that means, we want our brothers and sisters to keep it as well. And that means that we want there to be food stores open. All of us have done it. We've turned up to some part of Israel, thought, oh look, there's some, Rabbanut kosher place to eat. We've all lived in Chutz La'aretz where there's nothing to eat. We're like, good, there's something to eat. Good. And we want it to be there. And if it's only Heter Mechira, that's because that's what's available. We want it to be there. We want it to be there. We want it to be kosher for us who cares and for the people who don't care. So they eat kosher without trying. We want that. That's what we want in Israel. So how strict should you be? This is up to you. There are many, many rabbinical authorities who hold that you're being much stricter about Shmitta by eating Heter Mechira only, because you're encouraging all Jews in Israel to keep Shmitta. Now, once again, that's a bit of a radical approach, as opposed to those who would rather buy from overseas, or rather only eat whatever's on the trees at the moment, or would rather only buy from Arabs, okay? But there is rationale behind that, and every single approach has rationale behind it. And we're here to be in the land of Israel with everybody. And, that's one of the reasons I like living in Modiin, because it's not an exclusively religious community, and while perhaps the interaction isn't made as available as it should be, the non-religious and the religious Jews benefit a lot off each other. And I really enjoy that. And Shmitta, that needs to happen, and that can only happen by options being available to everybody. Anyone like to ask any questions? Lulavim and Etrogim. Okay, I'll take a quick little segue on this. So, the kedusha of the various leaves if they even have kedusha would be based on the picking date. So we get around this very simply by picking the lulavim and etrogim. So we're picking all of the vegetable stuff before Rosh Hashanah, and then the following year they pick it after Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that's easy. The etrog is messy because there's an argument in the Talmud about whether the etrog is a fruit or a vegetable. Now they're not arguing with a biological thing; they're claiming that etrog is unique, because there's a number of unique things about etrog, not just the fact that it's on the tree all year round. And so people are very, very strict about etrogim, and the general way they do it is that during Shmitta year you can't buy an etrog by itself. What you do is you buy a lulav together with the holder and the aravot, or the harasim I should say, and all these other things, and then the etrog comes as a gift. And so there's less scope with picking your own etrog in many, many stores in Shmitta time. But that doesn't happen this Shmitta. That will happen the following Shmitta. Because the Shmitta of the fruit is from the year where the fruit forms after Tu B'Shvat, which will be the following year. And so for the following year will be all the games to do with the lulav and etrog. For this year, it won't be anything, because firstly they'll pick them before Rosh Hashanah anyway, and they'll have formed before Shmitta, and they won't. Okay, certain parts of the Lulav and Etrog are considered to actually not have Kedushat Shmita at all, because they're not for decoration and they're not for smell, as opposed to flowers. Just a little tip: if you have flowers on your bush at home, you want to cut them off. What you should do is get a child who doesn't know what they're doing to cut them off,